Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next edition of the DFS Down Under Show presented by Draftstars. Smatho 10 back for another bumper edition of live streaming for round 3 of the AFL. Thanks for your company this evening. As always, we are breaking down AFL contests for Thursday night footy and for Friday night special Good Friday slate coming up. But to help me out with the actual guru knowledge that is the AFL DFS Down Under show, I'm bringing in Tristan Heffernan, also known as the Big Hef. How are you, mate?
The guru.
The guru.
Doing yourself every week with these intros, Smatho. How are you? I'm pretty good myself. Looking forward to a huge, big, long weekend action of AFL footy. It's great to have footy back, actually, and back to the normal quarter lengths, and seems some really exciting footy with this man on the mark stuff going on.
It is quite exciting. We saw in round 1 it changed the game, and then round 2 just backed it up with some cracking games of footy. Your West Coast Eagles were very good on Sunday, but unfortunately the Bulldogs managed to pull through. Must have been a bit of a heartache for result for you there, mate.
Yeah, always nice if they can pinch a game or two in Melbourne, but as far as games of footy goes, that's probably the number one we've seen this year, I'd say.
Now, of course, we are here thanks to Draftstars. Draftstars are Australia's number one daily fantasy platform, offering Australia and New Zealand entrants the chance to win big on AFL daily fantasy. They've wrote a little comment here tonight, say, send through your comments and questions throughout the stream. We love answering your comments, so make sure you pop them in the chat, the comments, or if you're on Twitter, pop them in as a bit of a comment. As we are live streaming the show this evening, so we'll endeavour to answer your questions. Mate, round 3. We've got a couple of good games coming up. First of all, we're going to talk about Pies and Lions. But we also, the first time in a long time, we're going to be talking some multi-game slates. So I'm looking forward to your thoughts throughout the evening. But it all starts here on Thursday night with the Magpies and the Lions, $75,000 prize pool, $15 entry free. First prize at $7,450 minimum. If we go over $75,000, that prize pool increases. So, and we've got the special time here at 7:40 p.m. here on a Thursday night. So, Hef, Collingwood are 2.5 point favourites, $1.85. The total is 172.5. Obviously, the game got changed from the Gabba to Marvel Stadium. In team news, we've got the teams tonight. Chris Mayne is in for the Pies, where Colin Ballenden, Devon Robertson, and Marcus Adams, the couple of bottom of the barrel guys, have come in for the Lions, who have been struck by a couple of injuries. We've lost Jamie Elliott with the Pies. He's got a broken leg. Harry Sharp, Jackson Pryor, and the Big O, who has done an ankle. So, Hef, $75,000 pool. Let me drag up the lobby for you. Let's talk AFL Daily Fantasy. Who are you looking so far for this particular match? What are your general thoughts before we start building teams?
General thoughts. It's going to be really interesting to see how Brisbane handle all this away from home COVID sort of impact. We noticed last year when there were hubs going on, it did impact some teams more than others, some players more than others, but it's not the ideal lead up for them travelling down to Geelong. They all had to go and buy some new Reg Grundies just to stay nice and fresh. But I think it won't have too much impact on them. But if they just didn't turn up on Thursday night and Collingwood got hold of them, it wouldn't be the biggest shock in the world. You could sort of pass them a little bit just because of this big interrupted preparation they've had. But a couple of different ways to look at it. I think you can make up your own mind which way you think it's going to go.
Okay. Now, before we get on to the particular positions for this particular match, I have my Schmatho's little stat here. Brisbane is ranked last in the competition for disposals, and they are last in the competition for marks. And that generates fantasy points. And if they're last, that means they're not generating much fantasy points at all, unfortunately.
You have to take that with a bit of context too, Smatho. They've come up against the Swans and the Cats, who, especially the Cats, are renowned for being very stingy when it comes to letting the opposition have the ball. So, I wouldn't get too caught up in that just yet.
Okay, fair enough. All right. Let's look at the rucks, as we always do on the show. Big O is out, is a big loss for the Lions. So in comes well, not really incomes, but Tom Fullerton did play up as a forward last week and had to do some second rock the fourth quarter. He's in there at 7,500. But obviously the two main guys for Collingwood, Brodie Grundy at 14,380 and Mason Cox at 9,320 are your selections for this week. Look, clearly that Grundy is going to be the popular choice. Can you talk me out of it, or are you going to talk me into it as a lock?
I think last week we did talk up Grundy as the one to go with, and I think that was where the edge was. I don't think there's going to be any edge with Grundy, but I don't want to be against him either. He's going to be really highly owned. I think that's for good reason. 9,000 for Mason Cox against Brisbane, who are reasonably strong down back. He is starting to get up in price there, and interesting that Oscar McInerney had been giving up the second most points to opposition ruckman this year, and he's only come up against Tom Hickey and Reece Stanley. So who knows what's going to happen with this combo of Fullerton and Ballenden, who we'll touch on later on. Fullerton, 7,500. It seems a bit exy to him, to be honest. And yeah, I think it could be a monster game for Grundy. I think there's enough value on the slate on this in this match that, well, you just put Grundy in and work around there. Yeah,
I think that price, that 14,000 price, is generous.
It's very
I would
reasonable,
say.
isn't it?
Yeah. So, look, you have to go with the field here at 14,380. Here's our first player into our little team that we're building here this evening. Let's move on to the defence then. And obviously, the Lions are pretty weak in this position. But they do come up against a Pies team that does let the opposition build out a halfback. We saw that with Carlton to some extent last week. But I think the Bulldogs exploited that as well. So Daniel Rich at 13,200 is the obvious option. He takes all their kick-ins. He plays on from all these kick-ins. So if we get Rich in, that kind of leaves less salary from the rest of your team. So who else can we rely on if we're going to look at Brisbane exploiting that data point there?
Yeah, Brisbane, they've always been a tricky team to play when they come up against these teams that allow points to backmen. They do have a lot of cheaper guys, but there's not a whole lot of consistency with any of them, and really not many of them have much of a ceiling as well. If I'm going to go cheap with Brisbane, I'm probably going to have a look at a guy called Marcus Adams who comes back into the team. It's definitely a risky play, even though he's at that 5K. He had one game last year and scored a whopping 12. He's a guy who was really promising a few years ago. He's had a ton of injuries. But even you go back a couple of years, out of 8 games, he topped 60 on 3 occasions. And he has had a season averaging 72 and another one above 60. So he's definitely got the ceiling there at 5K to be very playable, just with the knowledge that I wouldn't be piling into him because he can throw in, as I say, he got 12 last year. And the previous year he has had a few really low scores as well. But yeah, if you want to go rich, I'm quite happy to throw Adams in there as well. We mentioned last week against Carlton that Carlton defenders were the obvious play against Collingwood, but if you are looking at Collingwood stacks, don't underestimate how much the Pies can flick around the back line as well. I don't think there's much value, though, in all these backs. There, like guys like Noble and Moore, who we've been able to play at 10 and 9,000, even 8,000 Darcy Moore in previous games. They're starting to get quite up there. So tricky game for the backs, I think, Smatho, and that's why Adams has a bit of appeal for me at 5,000.
Yeah, let's have Adams in at 5,000. I do like what you said about Pies. If you want to run pie stacks, you might want to include these guys, but they're just a little bit too expensive for my line. So I'm going to ignore them and actually come down to Grant Birchall. 74 last week against Geelong. I reckon he'll build along with Rich along the back line itself. And what's that, 8,230? He's going to be my pick for you. So I'm going to go run an Adams Birchall back line here. I'm not ignoring the Pies there, but I think we can save money by using these couple of guys up down back. Now let's move on to the midfield. And look, I was pretty big on Lachie Neale last week. I had the graphics up. He was going to come up against Cam Guthrie, and then he's decided to get whacked by the Cats, and just his numbers at half time were devastating, but man, I reckon a week in Melbourne, bit of a freshen up. I reckon he's going to come back with a vengeance. He wants to show off while he's in Melbourne. He had a 95 fantasy point score against the Pies last year in shortened quarters in 2020. Look, yes, the Lions midfield was pretty awful. Only Lions getting over 80. But I do like Neil, but can you give me some reasons why I should not be considering Neil in this particular matchup, though?
Yeah, I'll play devil's advocate here, Smatho. I was really keen on Neil as well last week, but that tag that came from O'Connor just sort of it came out of nowhere. I didn't see Geelong using the tag against Neil. And now, once these guys start to get picked up by the taggers a couple of times, the word gets around the league that these guys are very gettable, and you can maybe chop off the Lions at their knees by taking out the engine room in Lachie Neale. I don't know if Collingwood is going to sort of go with that tactics, though. The main tagger in the past has been the Pig Greenwood, who's not playing.
No.
Whether they look to give a guy like Braden Sire a role that he's not really covering himself in glory in the first couple of weeks, much to the chagrin of a lot of these fantasy players who are looking to save cash on Sire, but whether they look to him or they look to a Tyler Brown or they look to, well, someone that we don't know, because obviously O'Connor came from nowhere last week as well. On the flip side, Nathan Buckley, we know how vocal he was. He didn't care about Tom Mitchell getting 50 touches a few years back, and they generally don't tag. So it's a really tricky one. You've got to make a decision there. I think if they don't tag Neil, he's probably going to go really big. There is talk of him being sore, potentially even not playing with a back injury. It's such a it's a really tricky choice that you've got to make. The safe option is to avoid him. But sometimes it's not the safe options that win you these slates, isn't it, Smatho?
It is. That is right. But for me, who likes to sit on the fence and then takes a 50-50 decision, I have to agree. I think we'll leave Neil this week because I really like the Pies in this particular position. So tell me about the Pies then. We've got Pendles at an absurd price at 12,630. That is very hard to get away from. I'm not going to get you to explain. He's going straight in. But talk about, can I get Taylor Adams or any other guys from the Pies who might be going pretty well against the Lions?
Yeah, I've got no real knocks on any of these guys. I don't think there's any great value in them all, but I think they can return value for sure. Got Adams, side bottom, Crisp, who we can play here through the middle of the ground. If you're looking to go cheaper, I think there are a couple of reasonable cheap options. I think Zach Bailey from the Lions is actually quite well priced back down there at 8,000. Tyler Brown at 7,000. It's quite easy for him to hit value. And my favourite value play here in the mids, he's also a forward. So depending what we do, I actually like Dane Zorko. He's sub 12K. With no Jared Berry still in the lineup, he's almost the guy that tips this Lions midfield over the top, and they have one sort of extra guy in their rotation. And Zorko's been the guy who's pushed forward on occasions to fit them all in. I think he probably sees a little bit more mid-time now, Zorko, when Berry's not around. And sub 12K, he's got the ceiling, he's got the floor. I think he is a really good play.
Okay. Well, don't waste the midfield spot. Let's get him straight into the forwards. Come back to my midfield. I liked your Zach Bailey call. I think he's going to be great at 8,250. So he can go in as well. And I've got Pendlebury. I've got Adams. I'm thinking that I might want to exploit the chip out from the Pies as well. And I do love Jack Crisp from last week. Cracked the ton last week. 117, nearly top score for the guys. Affordable price at 14.7. I think he can go in as well. That leaves us around 9K for our last player. So let's talk about forwards then in general before we select our final player. Look, this is a tough kind of lot. Once you've taken out Zorko and Sidebottom, we do have Jordan DeGoey at 11,580, and I want to start your thoughts there. He was very popular last week, that 10K, and he did salute it with that, was it 90-point score? That came across from a few goals. 4 goals to get to that score. So can we go to the JDG in this particular matchup if you want to get away from Zorko? I suppose you've got that choice there.
We did talk about backing the truck up on him last week to go in. If you did that, you would have been handsomely rewarded. We also mentioned
whoa. What did I hear the word back in the truck up?
we suggested that last week on a few of them, actually.
Now, Hef, I've got a little stinger for you because you love backing the truck up. Get all over this. Here we go. We are backing the truck up with Hef. Who are we talking? Jordan Agoe. Are we backing the truck up again on JDG?
You've sort of jumped the gun there, Smatho. I'm not suggesting to back the truck up this week on JDG. I think last week was the time you wanted to do it. This week, I think with Elliott out of the team, they bring in Main. That's not a like-for-like replacement there. It makes me think maybe Agoe returns to more of a forward role. He looked $1 million leading out there up forward last week, and maybe they decide, well, we'll run Main off a wing or something like that, which does bring Main into the calculations when you're looking for a cheaper midfielder. The thing about Agoe now, he's up to 11.5. He can have a really good game and return you sort of 60 to 70. A really good real life game, I guess you could say, and that wouldn't really be what you're after at 11.5. I don't think he's as easy to play as he was last week, put it that way, Smatho. A bit of extra price, maybe more time for the ball. He can definitely, as he showed last week, return value playing forward, but we know it's easier to rack up those points in the midfield. I'm not as keen on him this week, and when you talk about how popular he usually is, JDG, it actually turns me away from him a little bit.
Yeah, okay. He's going the fake card. I like it. All right, let's talk about some value then, because after these three, there's not much in the terms of superstars down here. Joe Danaher top scored for the forwards last week with an 80, and he was one of the better players on the slate last week. He's at 9,480, which currently doesn't fit in our little lineup here, but he's certainly in play if he thinks he's going to get all over the Pies defense. Tell me some of these options down here. Callum Brown, Tom Fulton, we've touched on. Mate, take it away here. Find me a little cheapie to round out this lineup we have here.
There's some pretty woeful averages amongst those cheaper guys there, isn't there, Smatho?
Very woeful.
Now, the issue we have is that I don't think there's so much value in this slate. My two favourite value forwards are all the way down here at 5,000. Now, we mentioned Connor Ballenden earlier. He's been named in the ruck. Like Fullerton, he was used in a sort of a second ruck forward role in his 2 games last season. His scores were quite woeful. He's more of a ruckman than Fullerton. I expect him to get the majority of the time in the ruck. I know it's a very hard matchup against Grundy, but for a guy who's going to spend basically the majority of the game in the ruck, I'm expecting 5K is just so cheap, and for him to get 40 or 50, he's quite an athletic sort of character. Ballenden, 2 meters tall, big fella. I think he's definitely worth playing at 5K, especially if you look to go away from Adams. I think he's more your guy there. And the other 5K guy there in Devon Robertson, he was a really highly rated midfielder when he came through the draft a couple of seasons ago. Hasn't seen a whole lot of AFL action yet. He can find the ball, and 5,000. It's not hard for these guys to make a value score. So they're my favourite 2 cheaper options. That doesn't really help us with our team because we've got a heap of cash left over. But maybe you look to upgrade Zach Bailey, or you can swing Zorko into the midfield even. You can play Agoe, so if you wanted to sneak him in over Zach Bailey, we could sort of fill out.
That has left me a lot of options. Like, yes, of course, we can get rid of Zach, and
this was what I was talking about with Grundy. I think that's why it's so easy to play Grundy, is because there's so much value around it. It's not necessary to go down in the rucks.
Yep. I'm liking that setup now. So Zorko, Devon, Scott Pendlebury, Adams, Crisp, Jordan Agoe, Marcus Adam, Grant Birchall, and also the big Brody Grundy there. Excellent. Take a screenshot of that, put it in, see how we go next week, see if we can make the cash for that particular side. All right, mate. Let's get rid of that. And let's talk about, here we go, Good Friday football, the $50,000 prize pool presented by Draftstars. It is a 2-game slate on Good Friday, starting around 4 p.m., I do believe, on a Friday afternoon. So what we got here? North Melbourne, who are currently $8 outsiders. They're playing the Western Bulldogs at $1.07 at Marvel, followed by Adelaide, who are just on $2, who are going to take the Gold Coast at $1.80 at Adelaide Oval. Also, if you want to get into the single contest, they're available at $20,000 per contest. Also, you can get into the high roller. You can also get into the micro, the minis, etc. Let me go down here and show you what we got here. The high roller, the fiver, the micro, it's all there on Draft. There's plenty of options at different buy-ins. Now, obviously, recording on here on Wednesday night on the live stream, we don't have their particular team news for the teams that come out on Thursday, so make sure you check them out. But I do have a couple of scoops already. Ben Cunnington should be back from his concussion during the preseason. They've already named Will Phillips as a debut for the Kangaroos. The Suns have lost Connor Buderick and Sam Day to knee injuries, which is going to be huge for their defence. That kind of gives them a couple of holes there. The Crows should get Jack Kelly back after his face was rearranged by Dangerfield, and Luke Brown is also a likely admission into the side, where the Bulldogs, there's not much news kicking around there, so they should be unchanged for that particular team. Now, obviously, if we don't get to talk about 2-game slates too much, we usually just break down the Thursday and the Friday game. So tell our viewers what you need to do to start with to talk about 2-game slates, what you need to look for, and strategies you can look at building teams to start with.
Yeah, obviously, the more games we get on a slate, the more you start to look at stacking certain teams and certain games. So you want to be well aware of the likely weather conditions and obviously the venues that both games are being played at. Obviously, if you get the differences between a high-scoring game and a low-scoring game can make all the difference when it comes to which teams are going to be winning on the slate. So the obvious one here is the Bulldogs running right against North Melbourne. So even if you like a guy in the Crows-Suns game, you could just be in danger of getting blown out of the water by an absolute massacre in the Dogs North Melbourne game. So you're still looking for value, but if you can look to link up some of your favourite game on the slate, that it can definitely pay off in multi-game slates.
Now, there is a rule that you need to abide by when you do multi-game slates. You do need to keep to under 5 players per team in a multi-game slate. So, unfortunately, you just can't simply stack 8 and one other guy from a different side. You need to only have 5 players only. So, bear that in mind when you build these teams on Draftstars. All right, let's whip through this particular slate quite quickly here, Hef. Tell me your best plays for this particular slate. Now, I don't really have a team in mind ready to go, so let's see if we can work out a little team for Friday, a Good Friday, and we'll start the rucks. Riley O'Brien, Tim English lead the slate with Jared Whitson, Toll Goldstein, your main 4 rucks. Stephen Martin should get another gig, and obviously Billy Franton is probably the only other player will play. I don't see these little cheapies here getting the game. So, Hef, who do you like here? Start off with the rucks.
The safest option, I think, is probably Jared Witts. He's going to get an absolute mountain of work there in the ruck with no real obvious backup for the Suns now that Sam Day has gone down. Bulldogs and North Melbourne are teams that we've talked about being quite leaky to opposition rucks. We saw Natanui nearly turn up there last week, even though Steph Martin's in the frame for the Bulldogs. I'm quite happy actually going against Goldstein a lot of the time. He can give up a lot of points and actually gave up a big score against Wicks last week. So Tim English is probably my left field option, but Witts would be he'd be my safest option.
Yeah, the safe option will be Witts. Like against Goldstein, he does leak fantasy points to Goldstein. So English, as he said, is rightly in play, but let's go the safe option here at 12,840. Let's move on to the fence. A glance here shows a lot of 8K players that are not that viable, so we might need to look at balance options here. Doggies are going to be pretty popular with the likes of Carb Daniel, Taylor Giray going well last week, even Bailey Williams at 10,950. I also like the look of Jack Lukosius at 10,890, but I need to be wary here, Hef, and tell me why on Jack.
Oh, that seems a really good price for Lukosius, doesn't it? Considering he's coming off a couple of really good scores. He's averaging 96. Now, the issue we have with Lukosius is with Sam Day out of the team, there is some talk that Lukosius might end up playing a little bit more forward. We know him last year as enjoying himself on a half-back flank. It's got even more fun for him this year, pushing up into a wing role where he's been really damaging with his brilliant kicking skills. If they do move him into a forward role, that changes the play a bit. He's not so much just trucking around behind the ball and getting some easy ball if he's up in the forward line. It's obviously a whole different kettle of fish. So I'd be a little bit wary of Lukosius and trying to find out a bit more about that role and maybe look at the team lineups and see what they do there at Gold Coast. One thing that we probably should be aware of here is in these first couple of games, Gold Coast are giving up the most points to opposition backs. West Coast and North Melbourne. So on that basis, that might bring in these Adelaide Crows into play on this slate. Lockie Shoal is a guy that's pretty reasonably priced, I think, at 11.5.
Where is he?
Given what he showed us in that first game when he went up with a big ton. So, and Brodie Smith, you think you're getting 11.5 for Lockie Shoal, you're getting 10.5 for Brodie Smith, and we know what he's capable of, even though he's started the season with a couple of lower scores. So if you want to put your faith in those early numbers here, maybe you can look at the Crows backs.
All right. I like that. Let's get Brodie in. Faith, Jack. Obviously, people will be looking at box scores only and not, if you listen to the show, obviously you get the good goss from Hef here. So let's get Lachlan in. So we start getting a little bit out of salary in terms of what we're going to look in the mids. So obviously very popular coming up is the Bulldogs midfield. 2 cracking games to start the season. Bontempelli's been on fire. A lot of talk about this particular midfield. But we can't have them all. Looks like we might be able to get 1, possibly 2, if we're going to come down some real value in the forward. So let me find a couple of options here in the midfield and who you really like from the Bulldogs point of view.
From the Bulldogs, wow, let's take your pick with the Bulldogs. They're going to dominate the ball against North Melbourne. I think the more interesting part of this to me is the fact that the value in the mids, let's go right down the bottom here, Smatho, because the value in the mids are all coming up against the Bulldogs. Now, you talked about Will Phillips. He's maybe the most popular fantasy option heading into the season when it comes to rookies. He's in there at 5,000. So usually when these highly rated draft picks come in for their first game and they get the 5K salary, they usually come straight in. So Phillips, you've got Lazaro above him, who's not as highly rated. There's ADB chiming in for us there. You have to take Lazaro. Now, he must have watched the game against Gold Coast because I did watch a fair bit of that game, which probably shows you where my life's at the moment, watching North Melbourne and Gold Coast on a Saturday night. But Lazaro is he's got some dash. He's a really good footballer, Lazaro. So they've found a bit of a steal with him. 5,000. You can see there he's got that 40-point average so far. And then the other guy, Tommy Powell, who is as promising as any sort of young midfielder we've seen come through the ranks this year, he's still only in the 6,000s. So and you've just scrolled past one of the great names in Dom Tyson too. Look how cheap he is.
Oh, look at that. 5,600.
5,600 for Dommy Tyson, who's basically priced at nearly 10x. I don't really know how he's that cheap. The problem is all these guys are going to come up against the Bulldogs. And the Bulldogs, we saw what they did. We saw what they did against the Pies. They dominated the ball against the Pies. They come off a big match against the Eagles. It's a big ask for these young kids to come in and try and get the ball off this Bulldogs lineup. So that's where the real tug of war is if you want to use these cheap guys against the Dogs. If you don't want to, if you scroll up a little bit more, there's a young fella that I'm really impressed with. He's around the $6,000 mark. Sam Berry.
Not Chase Jones.
Not Chase Jones. Chase Jones is one of the few players who's had more centre bounce attendances than possessions over the course of a season. I think he did last year. Whether he gets in the team, I don't know. But Sam Berry, he's a guy who's an absolute tackling machine. Pull up that game log for us, Smatho.
Yes, here it is. Oh, 10
Look
tackles.
at those tackles numbers.
Boy.
17 tackles in 2 games. You get him at 6,000. He's up against it's a Gold Coast midfield that's starting to look pretty good, but you're still not totally scared of. And he kicked 4 behinds last week against Sydney, so he could have got even higher in terms of scores. I actually would lean to Berry over those Kangaroos in terms of cheap options, but there is a lot of cheap options there for you, and which can allow you to spend up there in the backs if you want to, and you can spend up in the midfielders as well. But long story short, you get back to the Bulldogs, take your pick. I can't split a lot of these Bulldogs. They all get the ball. Treloar's the one that I'd probably avoid if I had to. But have you ever seen Jack McRae being 4th in order of salary on this Bulldogs list?
Oh, and that makes a popular pick. But you got to think, I've got to take down a GPP. Everyone's going to go on Jack McRae. So let me click the guy who's got the least form or average. That is Lockie Hunter. He can go in.
Oh, jeez.
12,760. He's going to be low owned.
Bontempelli's a guy that I would probably. I don't like playing Bontempelli in these games when they're going to whop him, because he seems to switch off a little bit. Was guys like McRae, Hunter, you're probably right with Hunter. These are the games he's made for, the 100-point floggings, and he can really just go and eat as much as he likes. So that's worth considering as well. You like Jed Anderson last week, Smatho?
I do like Jed Anderson. 14,380. Obviously took all the ball off Dom Tyson. Left him with nothing.
He was the one guy that stood up for North Melbourne last week in what was a very, very ordinary showing. Jed Anderson was just lion-hearted in the midfield there.
Yeah. Ben Cunnington coming back does make me wary, though. But, if everyone's piling in the Bulldogs, I'm going to pile into Jed here at 14,380. So let's move on. Let's get into the forwards. Also, we've got a little bit of cash here to spend now. So what do we got here? So Josh Dunkley at 15,690 could be a great pick considering look at the other prices that we have here. Look, 42-point line is the line between the Bulldogs and North Melbourne. So you'd be silly to take any key forwards here for the Kangas. So you really want to be looking at some key Bulldogs actions. And now, if I scroll down here, Josh Bruce and Aaron Norton, both he's at 8,800 and 8,790. So if you're going a little bit more heavy in the midfield, do you reckon these two guys could be good salary savers if you decide to go really heavy in the mids?
Well, yeah, Norton would be my pick of the two. We know he's got an absolute super set of mitts on him, Aaron Norton, and this is it's tailor-made for him. There's no Robbie Tarrant around, which sort of makes things easier for a forward coming up against North Melbourne. Really well priced, got a big ceiling. Can throw in the odd stinker, but I definitely wouldn't talk you out of Norton.
Good, he's in. That leaves
15,000. There's a guy below him there, Smatho, who was the absolute fantasy darling after round 1.
There he is.
He was in the aforementioned game that I spent far too long watching on Saturday night. That was mainly to kick home my mate, the Bristle Man. Shout out to Briz17, who took out that Saturday night slate there on Draftstars, thanks to a 60-metre lead from Oleg Markov in the final minute of the game. That's what had me watching the game a lot. But Jaden Stevenson went from chocolates to boiled lollies. He was absolutely pathetic against Gold Coast. He didn't even seem like he wanted to be there. So that 128 just stands out there at 8,000. But last week we saw the flip side, and it was not good viewing at all. And against a team like the Bulldogs, who don't like to give you the ball if they don't have to, he's got his work cut out. So I'd be advising some caution with Jaden Stevenson.
Okay. Any other cheap ones down here? If you're actually struggling for cash down here, and there's nothing really pop. Mitch Wallace at 7,300. That could be another goer. Will Brodie. Tell me about Will Brodie. He's been a bit of a talk that he might get some more time running through the wing or halfback. Is that correct? Or am I thinking that he's just...
He's been around the ball. Obviously, when Rao went down round 1, he had a bit of time through the middle. He does seem really cheap at 6'7", Brodie. We know he can score hundreds when the time is right. I'm a little bit disappointed with his first couple of games, but in terms of a high risk, high reward selection, I think he's in play. Brodie, there was a guy just above Brodie, a little bit further up. We're talking about Bulldogs. I really like a kid called Latham Vandermeer, who at 77.50, if it is going to be a massacre, he sort of runs off half forward there. You saw he got 65 in the first week. That 48 was against a really tough opponent in the Eagles. I think he's a guy that could go 10x quite reasonably, especially if they get involved in a flogging there. So he's another cheap guy to throw on the radar.
Yeah, there's one last player I want to talk about before filling this particular spot. And it's pretty much the leading fantasy forward in the competition. Taylor Walker at 11,950 on an average of 112.5. Absolutely on fire so far. 11 goals through 2 games. Racking up the marks. Couple of tackles in there. Against the Gold Coast, who lost a couple of key position players. This is not a bad play. What do you think?
It feels like the ship's almost sailed on Taylor Walker. Now he's up to 12,000. You really need to be getting up towards the 100-point mark at that price if we are going to see some shenanigans in the Bulldogs Kangas game. I wouldn't say he couldn't. I'd have minimal exposure to Tex, but he's looking like a new man again this year, Tex. And in fact, the Crows are looking like a new team. They've brought a few kids in. We talked about Berry. They've got Schoenberg in. They've got Scholl running off a wing. They get back home there against the Suns, who have not. They're usually pretty good early in the season, the Suns, but they have been known to fall apart away from home. I wouldn't say it's impossible for Tex, but it feels like he just missed the boat on him a little bit.
As you're talking about Tex, obviously, being a fence sit on there, I have fixed up the particular slide. I put Mitch Wallace in at 7,370, which means I got rid of our little Adelaide little gun. So therefore, I can get Bailey Smith at 13,620. It gives me 4 Bulldogs players, a couple of cheap Kangas Lazaro, some Adelaide working out of the fence. I really like that one. What do you think of that particular lineup on the fly there, Hef?
I think that's looking beautiful till the teams come out tomorrow night, Smatho.
Excellent. All right. Now, before we go, I have one more comment here from AD. He's gone, boys, my mate Leroy is terrible at this game. Any tips for him? Mate, get onto dailyfantasyrankings.com.au. Get onto there. There's the training camp where if he's an absolute amateur, then get onto the training camp. Tells you how to play AFL DFS here, especially on Draftstars. Get on the cheat sheets. Get on the data tools, which are all for free. Make sure you get onto them. And then also follow Jesse's articles, which are available on dailyfantasyrankings.com.au. They're all for free. Points you in the right direction there, AD. So make sure you give him a little shout out to him. Say, get on the DFR. So, Hef, have a happy Easter. Thank you for joining us on the DFS Down Under show.
Thank you, Smatho.
Before you go, any big plans? Any big plans before the Easter break?
Let's just hope I can find myself watching a better game than Gold Coast North Melbourne this weekend. Because, my life needs to take an upturn, and there's plenty of footy at least. Plenty of footy on the weekend. So
5 days of it. So make sure you get to the draftstars.com.au. Plenty of contests throughout the Easter weekend. We look forward to seeing you all next week for round 4 on the Down Under show. Thanks again, Hef, and we'll catch you next week. Cheers.
Thanks, mate. See ya.